What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video I'm going to be going through my top 36 fantasy football running back rankings for the 2024 fantasy football season. I think the last video I did was top 24. We're bumping it up to the top 36, so through the running back threes. Definitely have, a few shakeups from last time, obviously adding some running backs also. So let me know your thoughts on these rankings. Who do you think should be higher or lower? Would love to hear it. Also give me your reasoning. And let's just dive right into it. We're going to start off in tier 1, and there's only one tier 1 running back. It's going to be Christian McCaffrey. It seems like at this point, he is pretty much the consensus running back 1. He averaged 24.5 PPR points per game in 2023. In his last 4 full seasons, he has been at worst the running back 2 in points per game. So as long as CMC is healthy, you know he is giving you that high-end running back 1 production. I do think there are some other running backs with very high ceilings that could potentially challenge him to be the running back 1 overall. But like if you told me Christian McCaffrey stayed healthy throughout the entire season, I definitely think he has to have the highest odds to be the running back 1 overall, which is why I have him here as my 101. Now shifting into tier 2, 2 running backs here. My RB2 is going to be Breece Hall, and even though he was coming off a torn ACL last year, once he was cleared for a full workload in week 5, he averaged 19.3 PPR points per game. He was first in targets, receptions, receiving yards, so we know he has that receiving ceiling. He was also top 6 in rushing yards over expected per attempt, and he was giving you nearly 20 PPR points per game on an offense with one of the worst O-lines, also just had horrific quarterback play. Now he has Aaron Rodgers back. This offensive line is definitely improved from last year, so I definitely think Breece Hall is someone who has like 22 plus PPR point per game upside. We'll just have to have Aaron Rodgers healthy. As long as this Jets offense even looks competent, I think Breece Hall is going to be a great fantasy option. And then the guy who I have right behind Breece, these two are pretty much, neck and neck in everyone's rankings. I wouldn't be, shocked if Bijan Robinson ended up being better than Breece Hall. I slightly have Breece ahead of him, but Bijan's going to be my running back 3 here. And he is coming off somewhat of an underwhelming rookie season. And it really wasn't due to how he actually played, it was just his usage. He had a very, very low 53% opportunity share, and that's just not going to cut it on a bad overall offense. Like the next running back I'm talking about, he had a pretty low opportunity share, but he was on a great offense. Bijan Robinson was not on this Falcons team, but he pretty much has upgrades across the board this offseason. Arthur Smith is gone, which means he should now be used like a workhorse. That's what we've been hearing out of, the Falcons coaching staff. You also have Kirk Cousins coming in at quarterback, replacing like the Desmond Ridder, Taylor Heineke duo, also a massive upgrade there. So I think this is the year we see a monster breakout out of Bijan Robinson, which is why I have him as a top 3 RB. Now shifting into tier 3, also 2 running backs in this tier. My running back 4 is going to be Jahmyr Gibbs, and he averaged nearly 20 PPR points per game after he returned from a hamstring injury. So in his last 10 games of the season, he averaged 19.4 points per game. He's the guy I mentioned where he did it on only a 51% opportunity share. I do think he takes a leap this year, maybe in like the 55 to 60% area. I don't think he's ever going to be like a monster workload guy, especially in this Lions offense. It just seems like they don't want to use him that way. You have David Montgomery there. There's no reason to run him into the ground, but he has the efficiency. He has the receiving upside. He has the touchdowns. I really think the only thing that's kind of holding him out of tier 2 is that monster workload, but he has everything else. I think he's a nice pick at like the back end of the first round. And then the other tier 3 running back, Jonathan Taylor. There's no doubt he's been disappointing over the past 2 seasons. 2022, that was pretty much just due to injuries. 2023, he had like the weird contract thing at the beginning of the year, was also injured, and then also had a season-ending injury towards the end of the 2023 season. And I view this more as just him being unlucky compared to like him being injury-prone. I know people like love to throw out the injury-prone narrative. Someone gets hurt in multiple seasons. Oh my God, they're injury-prone. You can't draft them. They're just going to get hurt. And ankle injuries kind of have been an issue for him, but it was also the thumb towards the back end of last year. And just 2 years ago, I had people, all up in my comments talking about how CMC was injury prone. He was coming off of 2 injury-riddled seasons. They were saying he was too fragile. He couldn't play a full 16, 17 games. Then he went running back 2 and running back 1 in points per game in back-to-back seasons and has played 33 out of 34 regular season games. I think a lot of times injuries are kind of just bad luck. Some dudes get them more than others. JT, I think he's been unlucky over the past 2 seasons. I don't think he's like significantly more likely to get injured than some of the other running backs going, around him. And we have to remember, the last time we saw him healthy was 2021. He was the running back 1 in points per game, averaging 22 points per game. I don't know if that type of ceiling is repeatable. I feel like everything about that season he can probably repeat, maybe minus the touchdowns. He rushed for over 1,800 yards on really strong efficiency, 5.5 yards per carry. I think that efficiency is going to be there, with the threat of Richardson's legs. He also caught 40 passes for 360 receiving yards, so solid receiving usage, but like nothing insane. I don't think that's out of the question here in 2024. The 20 touchdowns is the thing that I don't know if he's going to get there, right? You have Anthony Richardson kind of vulturing on the goal line. 20 touchdowns is already a lot, even if you don't have, a monster mobile quarterback. But I think he could get like 12 to 15 touchdowns. I still think that would put him in contention to be like a 20-plus point per game guy, which I think, 1-2 turn area is a fair price to pay for that type of ceiling. So that's where I have Jonathan Taylor. Now, shifting into tier 4, this is probably where I start to get, a little bit away from consensus, because my running back 6 is going to be Devon Achane. And as you can tell, I am very high on Achane this season, and I'm just a little bit confused about, some of the narratives surrounding him, because we saw him average 20.8 PPR points per game in his 9 healthy games last year as a rookie. And now people are somehow like completely unwilling to draft him even in the second round, like rookie running back, 20 plus points per game, and now he's being relegated to round 3 or later. I can't really wrap my head around that. I understand, some of the concerns. I've seen it in my comments, right? He's not a big running back. He's not your prototypical workhorse. He's 5'9". He's 190 pounds. I do think he might be closer to 200 at this point. This is something that hasn't been talked about a lot, but he ran track in college, so he kind of needed to keep his weight down a little bit. This is not like an argument saying that he's going to be like workhorse size, but like the 190 seemed like the massive outlier. He could be more 195, somewhere in like the 195 to 200 range. I don't think that's crazy. Kyron Williams last year, 194, or, at the combine, he was 194. So it's not unheard of for these lighter running backs. Jahmyr Gibbs last year, right? It can definitely happen. And the thing with Achane is that he's never going to be a 75+% opportunity guy. The Dolphins aren't going to be running him into the ground. But the beauty of it is that he doesn't need to have that type of insane workload. He was by far the most efficient running back in the NFL last year. This dude averaged 7.8 yards per carry on over 100 attempts. Now, is that, sustainable year after year? No, but it just speaks to how impressive he was as a rookie, in year 1 last year. He was number 1 in yards per touch for running backs. He was number 1 in fantasy points per opportunity, also number 1 in breakaway run rate, and he averaged 2.87 rushing yards over expected per attempt. That is a full yard better than the next highest player since the NFL started tracking that in 2018. So he just completely wiped the competition in terms of his efficiency last year. And this isn't even a take where I'm like down on Mostert or I'm down on Jalen Wright, but I've also seen some stuff like this is going to be a 3-headed committee. Wright's going to eat into Achane's work. And I just find it really hard to believe that those two are going to be taking more than 50% of this backfield. I think if Jalen Wright's making a push for touches, I think it's going to be out of Raheem Mostert's, opportunity share. I'm confident Raheem Mostert's getting 50+% of the opportunities. He was just too impressive last year to not give him that role. So maybe you're concerned about the injuries. He missed 6 games last year. He was not a super injury-prone dude in college, so I'm not super scared off of it. They're not running him into the ground like we saw last year. I just think he's a perfect fit in this offense, and if he's getting, over half of this backfield, I'm very positive he's delivering pretty much high-end running back 1 production, and you might be able to get that in the 3rd round. Now, my running back 7 is going to be Saquon Barkley. And I think he's one of the players that I've seen the biggest disconnect when we're comparing casual platforms and more competitive platforms. Like on, Yahoo, ESPN, he's getting like round 1 hype. Whereas like Underdog, he's going mid to late 2nd round. So pretty significant difference, especially, the 2nd round this year. It's not super solid. So for him to be going back end round 2, people, putting their money on the line aren't super high on Saquon, or they aren't as high, as people drafting on ESPN, Yahoo. And I think the thought process for most people on Saquon Barkley is that they know he's a really good running back, and they know the Eagles have a really good run game. And so the conclusion, which, is not crazy, is that Saquon, if he's a good runner, going to a team with a good run attack, he's going to dominate, he's going to be great for fantasy. But there are some red flags to me that I think some people are kind of ignoring here, or, just maybe aren't super aware of. And for me, it comes down to Saquon Barkley's upside here, because I have no doubt that Saquon's going to come in, He's going to get a lot of work on the ground. He's going to rush for a ton of yards. He's going to be very efficient. My biggest question is, what are we looking at in the touchdown and receiving departments? Because Jalen Hurts has 28 rushing touchdowns over the past 2 seasons. We know they've gone to the tush push when they get to the goal line. It's been very, very effective. Now, maybe Jason Kelce retiring, a new offensive coordinator coming in, like maybe they move away from that a little bit, but I definitely don't think it's a guarantee, especially when they've been so successful. Like, who knows? Maybe Jason Kelce is like 100% of the tush push. I don't think he is. I think he's very good at it. I don't think like losing him means they're just going to be, terrible at it. So I think that's a concern. And it's also hard to see them being better than like league average on pass attempts per running back. They just, haven't done it. Typically mobile quarterbacks, they're not targeting the running backs a ton because instead of checking down, they're looking to scramble, looking to use their legs. That's kind of been the case here with Jalen Hurts. And then when we actually look at Saquon Barkley's career, I feel like a lot of people are still attached to his rookie season, and I get it, because his rookie year was truly legendary. He had over 1,300 rushing yards on 5 yards per carry, caught 91 passes for 721 receiving yards, had 1.54 rushing yards over expected per attempt. Unfortunately, since then, he hasn't gone over 0.5 yards over expected per attempt. He averaged 24 PPR points per game, and he did that on a 5-11 team. So it's not like he was doing this on a top-tier offense, was the beneficiary of a great situation around him. Well, he was like the second pick. This was not a good team. They were 5-11, even with that great season. The problem is that since then, he hasn't hit a 20-plus point per game season. He hasn't hit 18-plus points per game in his last 4 seasons. And I think, injuries have hurt him here. This may sound overall negative, but I feel like I'm a little bit lower than consensus, so I kind of have to explain why I'm not quite as high on him as others. With that being said, I still have him as like a high to mid-tier round 2 pick. Like, I'm still taking him in that range. I'm just not in like that round 1 territory, and it just comes down to the question marks surrounding the touchdowns, and then also what his receiving usage is going to be like. The receiving's also been pretty disappointing over the past couple of seasons. You think about these Giants offenses that haven't had great weapons. I expected more receiving production. We haven't really got it, and I don't know if that's actually going to be unlocked here with the Eagles. Because, 91 receptions as a rookie is crazy, and we just haven't really gotten back to that. Continuing on with Tier 4, Kyren Williams is going to be my running back 8, and some people seem a little out on him due to the Blake Corum draft pick. Personally, I don't think it's a massive deal. I think the Rams view Corum more as like Kyren Williams' insurance if he were to go down. They've even talked about how they liked Blake Corum because they think he's very, very similar to Kyren Williams. So in my mind, that's like, all right, Kyren goes down, you pretty much like have, a slightly lesser version of Kyren Williams coming in, taking his place. I don't think Corum's going to come in and like unseat him as the running back 1. And I think it was, probably unreasonable to expect a 5'9", 195-pound running back to maintain like the 4th highest opportunity share. That's what he had last year. It probably wasn't going to happen regardless of, whether or not they picked Blake Corum here. But Kyren was still very, very productive despite that very large opportunity share. He was the running back 2 in points per game. He was 3rd in touchdowns, rushing yards, 4th in red zone touches, despite missing 5 games on the season. He also had the 7th highest rushing yards over expected per attempt, which given his workload, I think is very impressive to have that type of efficiency, especially as a smaller running back. Like, even though he missed some time, when he was out there, he was still a very efficient option. So I do think his volume is going to decrease a little bit, but I'm still expecting him to handle a solid workload on a good offense. He has receiving upside, so still very in on Kyren Williams this year. Then after Kyren, I have Derrick Henry, and I do think, like, him going to the Ravens, I really feel like it's a pretty perfect fit here. This Ravens backfield last year averaged 24.3 PPR points per game, and that was while being led by Gus Edwards and Justice Hill. So obviously, Derrick Henry's not getting 100% of the opportunities, but he could be a 75% opportunity share guy. You have to imagine he's a better overall running back than, Gus Edwards and Justice Hill. So there's, a prime opportunity for Derrick Henry to have a pretty big season here. The Ravens aren't going to be a team that heavily targets the running backs, but that's never really been Derrick Henry's game, so not super concerned about that. I think his efficiency should be pretty amazing with the threat of Lamar's legs, just like I talked about with JT and Anthony Richardson. And I also think he's going to have a lot of touchdown upside, because even though Lamar is a mobile quarterback, he really hasn't been someone who's getting into the end zone a ton with his legs. He has 10 total rushing touchdowns over the past 3 seasons. He's maxed out at 7 in the NFL. He's not a dude who's going to be taking a ton of touchdowns, vulturing like a Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen. I mean, Gus Edwards last year rushed for 13 touchdowns. So there is definitely a pretty high ceiling here for Derrick Henry. But as always, we have to point out the red flags here. And there's always going to be a risk when you are drafting a 30-year-old running back with the second most touches amongst active RBs. So a fall off is coming at some point, right? Maybe it's 2 years from now. Maybe it's next year. Maybe it's here in 2024. But that is just something you have to worry about here, right? Like the players going around him. Kyron Williams isn't falling off a cliff. Saquon's probably not falling off a cliff. Derrick Henry, he's up there in age, a lot of wear and tear on the body. Who knows what happens, but if he does stay healthy, you're telling me he's the same dude we've seen over the past few seasons, then he's going to end up being a smash pick here at running back 9. I think right now I have him as like a back-end round 2 pick, and I think that's a pretty fair spot. And then wrapping up tier 4, we have Travis Etienne, and I feel like Etienne's being slept on a little bit here. I feel like on some platforms, he's kind of distanced from these other guys in tier 4, but he's coming off a season where he was the running back 7 in points per game. He saw really strong usage, was 6th in opportunity share. Unfortunately, his efficiency definitely took a hit from 2022. Heading into last year, it was like, all right, he was super efficient. He was great on the ground last year. In 2023, can we up his workload? Can we get him more involved as a pass catcher? And we got all that. Unfortunately, the efficiency did not stick. 2023, 3.8 yards per carry, negative 0.29 rushing yards over expected per attempt. You compare that to 2022, he was at 5.1 yards per carry, 1.07 rushing yards over expected per attempt, which is a fantastic number. I don't know if the Jaguars want Etienne to have the same workload as he did last year, but they also don't have like a clear-cut running back 1 who's really going to push him for work. Like I was someone who was pretty in on Tank Bigsby last year as like a later round option. I didn't think they wanted to use Etienne as a workhorse. I think they wanted like that complimentary back. And I don't know if I was wrong in, them wanting that, but Tank Bigsby was just not good enough to actually take any work away from Travis Etienne. Even with him being inefficient, Tank Bigsby was just straight up worse. They also have Dearness Johnson there. Neither of those guys are world beaters who are like going to come in and really cut into Etienne's workload. So I do think if he can somehow pair his 2022 efficiency with his 2023 usage, he really does have high-end running back 1 upside, and definitely someone who I think we should be considering at like the 2-3 turn area. Now, pivoting into tier 5, we have Isaiah Pacheco, and he's coming off a season where he was the running back 14 in points per game. The Chiefs have done pretty much nothing to add running back competition, and I expect this Chiefs offense to be significantly better than they were last year, honestly. Last season, they were 14th in points per game. From 2018 to 2022, their worst season was number 6 in points per game. So last year was weird. The weapons were bad. Maybe Kelsey's starting to slip a little bit, but this year they add Marquise Brown, they add Xavier Worthy. Like, this should be a much better unit. And Pacheco had the 8th highest opportunity share. So if you're giving me a running back with a top 10 opportunity share on an offense that's probably going to be, top 6, an elite unit, also had some, receiving usage last year. He's not, just being used on the ground. You throw all that together, if I'm drafting him as like a back-end running back 1, I think that's a pretty fair price for him. And then my other tier 5 running back, it's Josh Jacobs. And I'm still kind of up in the air on Josh Jacobs, whether or not I want to move him down farther than this. And I just feel like his range of outcomes seems pretty wide because he had a very impressive 2022 season, monster workload year, great for fantasy, great from a real-life NFL perspective. But he is coming off a really, really bad 2023. He averaged 3.5 yards per carry, negative 0.37 rushing yards over expected per attempt. And you can blame that on the Raiders, you can blame that on the O-line, but Zamir White was a guy that was like over 0.3 rushing yards over expected per attempt. So another dude in his running back room, also handled a large workload for certain games. He was just straight up, more efficient than Josh Jacobs, and Zamir White is like a day 3 pick, like not some sort of world beater running back here. We know LaFleur is kind of known for using running back by committees. We've even seen him use like Derrick Henry in a committee. So if you're using Derrick Henry in a committee when he was an OC, like I'm sure he's fine throwing Josh Jacobs into a committee. The Packers drafted Marshawn Lloyd in the 3rd round. It seems like they want to get him involved right away. It seems like they're very, very high on him. I think he's going to beat out A.J. Dillon, and I think he's kind of going to be, in that potential committee role here. Josh Jacobs also signed a 4-year deal, but the Packers can get out of that contract after this season, so they are not tied to him long-term. If he's not playing well, like I don't think they're going to dig their heels in and be like, we've committed so much to him, like we have to keep him in the lineup. I don't think that's how it's going to go. So I do feel like there are just, ways that he completely face plants. On the other hand, if he has some sort of backup here, on the other hand, if he has some sort of bounce back here, leading this Packers offense, could have some massive upside for fantasy football. We've seen Aaron Jones have some really impressive seasons without having a massive opportunity share. I think Josh Jacobs, if he's playing well, would probably handle a slightly larger workload than we saw with Aaron Jones. And so the upside's there, but I also feel like he might be just cooked at this point, and he could end up being pretty disappointing. Might end up being like a gross back-end RB2. I'm not saying that's like the most likely outcome, but just something to kind of consider here. Now, pivoting into tier 6, we have James Cook as my running back 13. He had a nice year too, was 4th in rushing yards, 8th in receiving yards, running back 19 in points per game. Honestly, just like missed out on some pretty simple touchdowns. I think he had like 5 or 6 drops, but pretty much every single one of those like could have been a touchdown. I don't think that's something that's going to like carry over here to 2024. I also wouldn't be surprised if the Bills kind of relied on James Cook more this season. Their weapons have kind of been shaken up. Diggs is gone. Gabe Davis is gone. You have Curtis Samuel coming in. Kincaid heading into year 2. You have Khalil Shakir year 3. And then rookie Keon Coleman. Like, there's no guarantee those weapons all pan out and like this is like a great passing attack. I mean, it'll be a good passing attack because of Josh Allen, but I think they might rely on the run a little bit more. James Cook catching passes out of the backfield. I do think he definitely should be scoring more than 6 times in 2024, even if he's not getting the goal line work. And then the only real competition they added was like day 3 pick Ray Davis. So he still should be locked in here as the running back 1, like him as a high-end RB2 pick. Right behind James Cook, we have Joe Mixon. And I think the upside for Mixon here is pretty clear. He has a pretty decent opportunity to be the workhorse for a top offense here with the Texans. Outside of Joe Mixon's rookie season, he's been a guy who's been top 7 in opportunity share every single season. Devin Singletary's gone. He was kind of operating as the lead back last year. Dameon Pierce is still there, but he was just really rough last season. I feel like the issue for Mixon is that, even though he's stepping into this workhorse role, this wasn't a super valuable backfield to be a part of last season. The entire backfield averaged 17.7 PPR points per game. I'd also expect this, Texans team to be more pass heavy this year. You have Tank Dell healthy, Nico Collins obviously a huge breakout, Stephon Diggs coming in, Dalton Schultz at the tight end position. So maybe that improves the efficiency here, but I think the volume's probably going to go down. And then you factor in the idea that Joe Mixon's never really been all that efficient. Like, he has one season above 4.1 yards per carry. I think we're in this spot where he could be starting to slip a little bit. Like, when you're not super efficient on a top team, maybe some other dude somehow steps up. Maybe Dameon Pierce has a resurgence. That's, looking at it a little bit negative. I still think he's a really, solid pick as a high-end running back too. They paid him. He's a veteran. He has NFL experience. I think he's going to lead this backfield, handle a solid workload. Don't know if the efficiency is going to be great, but I think he's a fine pick as like a high-end running back 2 play. And then also in tier 6, we have Rachaad White, and he's coming off a pretty huge year 2 for fantasy. Running back 10 in points per game, was the clear workhorse for this Bucs offense. 4th in snap share, 7th in opportunity share. The big question is just, can he retain that usage? Because sometimes when you break out, you have, a monster workload, you have a great fantasy season. It also means you played really, really well. It's not quite the case here for Rachaad White. Dave Canales let him be this workhorse. He, unfortunately for Rachaad White, is gone, took the head coaching job with the Panthers. And Rachaad White definitely wasn't perfect last year. He was solid as a pass catcher. We know that's kind of his strength. But he averaged 3.6 yards per carry. He had the most rushing yards under expected amongst all running backs. So the efficiency was bad, and he also, was not helping himself at all. Not saying like the Bucs run blocking was like elite, but he did himself no favors last year as a pure runner. The thing that, is kind of positive here for Rachaad White is that the Bucs really haven't brought in any legit competition. They drafted Bucky Irving day 3. You have Chase Edmonds, Sean Tucker, who are still on the roster, but they were there last year, didn't really do anything, didn't break into his usage. So he should be lined up as the clear running back 1 again. It's just that his performance hasn't given me a ton of confidence that he's a lock to keep that role. But then when you look at the rest of the roster, it's like, all right, well, who's actually pushing him for touches? Is it Bucky Irving? Is it Chase Edmonds, who seemed like was already kind of washed like a couple years ago? Is it Sean Tucker? Like, I don't know if any of those dudes are stepping in, but you also just have the opportunity where it's like, if he's inefficient and you have another running back that's inefficient, would you rather have 2 guys that are somewhat fresh and being inefficient, or do you just want to feed the one dude and kind of wear him down? So That's the potential downside for Rachaad White, but if he retains his workload from last year, he's definitely going to pay off here as the running back 15. Now, shifting into tier 7, my running back 16 is going to be Alvin Kamara. And it always feels a little bit gross when we're drafting like these inefficient veterans, especially when we're like anticipating a pretty decent fall off in their production, right? Alvin Kamara was the running back 3 in PPR points per game last year. I don't think there's anyone out there that thinks he's going to like replicate that production. So we know he's going to slip, but it's like, how far is he actually going to slip? Like, is he just completely going to fall off a cliff and this ends up being like a terrible pick? Is it going to be more of a gradual fall off, or maybe he's giving you, fringe running back 1 production? That would be a win with where I have him ranked. So we're just trying to like catch him in the right spot here. I think running back 16 is fair. He was definitely carried by his receiving usage last year. He was number 2 in targets and receptions despite missing 4 games, but he was 26th in yards per reception. So he was getting, receptions. He had a nice target share, receiving yards per route run. But it was kind of empty volume. Like, they didn't have a ton of weapons. They were just getting them the ball. It wasn't, it was not winning plays out of Alvin Kamara there as a receiving back, which, like, not his fault. They were feeding him. He was producing for fantasy. That's fine. I just don't think that's something that's going to be repeated here in 2024. The rushing efficiency has also just really slipped for Alvin Kamara. He's maxed out at 4 yards per carry over the past 3 seasons. In his first 4 seasons, his worst year was 4.6 yards per carry. He's been in the negatives in rushing yards over expected in each of the past 3 seasons. He's been bottom 6 in 2 of those 3. He'll still likely have like a solid role in this offense. The team has limited weapons, like I talked about, and he still is a viable, receiving option out of the backfield. You have Jamal Williams, you have Kendre Miller, who didn't really get a great shake in year 1. So there are guys who, could take some work from him. Right now I have him as like a, mid to high end running back 2. Like I said, I don't feel great about it. I don't think he's someone I'm going to be hitting the draft button a ton on, but that's where I'm at right now. Also in tier 7, Aaron Jones as my RB17. I think this is a pretty interesting landing spot here with the Vikings. I'm not expecting him to come in, have a monster workload. I think Ty Chandler's probably going to filter in as the running back 2, but Aaron Jones hasn't needed a monster workload to produce in the past. His highest opportunity share season was 18th, which is kind of crazy because he has finishes as the running back 17, 3, 4, 11, 11, and then 26 last year. So he's been fairly consistent. As long as he can stay healthy, I think he'll be a pretty reliable running back 2 for you. My RB18 is going to be Jonathan Brooks. I've talked about him in a ton of different videos, typically videos where I'm saying like, must draft players, must draft running back, must draft player in each round. I'm very, very high on Jonathan Brooks. He is one of my favorite values this season. He was a 2nd round pick in this most recent NFL draft. He has a 3-down skill set. He's paired with Dave Canales, who, like I mentioned, with Rachaad White. He gave White a monster workload last year. I think Jonathan Brooks, much better running back, than Rachaad White, and he was pretty much hand-picked from Dave Canales, right? He's the head coach. They're making that pick. They're bringing Jonathan Brooks aboard. The red flag is obviously the torn ACL. All the reports have been positive. He should be ready for week 1. I'm kind of anticipating a slower start, but I think he's going to have a big finish. I've talked about this in other videos, but I feel like without the torn ACL, like if he was just drafted round 2, he might have gone earlier than round 2, based on getting that capital coming off a torn ACL. But say he had, everything was the same, the landing spot's the same, the capital's the same. If he was fully healthy heading into the season, not coming off a torn ACL, I feel like the latest he's going is probably round 3. Like, maybe disagree. Maybe the latest is round 4. But, like, a running back with that type of capital, lined up to have a workhorse role, he would be going there. So I think the discount's too great on him. He's my running back 18. Think he can be a league winner for you. Behind Jonathan Brooks, we have Kenneth Walker. We had Brooks, who's someone I'm very high on. Walker, a little bit lower on. And I just don't think it's like a foregone conclusion that Kenneth Walker is the clear running back 1 and Charbonnet is the clear running back 2. We look at them last year, or just looking at them, together. I think the idea is like, all right, Kenneth Walker is probably the better pure runner. Charbonnet is probably the better pass catcher. And I'd probably agree with that. Like, Charbonnet has the better college receiving profile. They were pretty similar in terms of their receiving usage last year, but Charbonnet was kind of, working his way into this offense. But Charbonnet was actually better in yards per carry and rushing yards over expected per attempt last year. So if you're going to tell me, like, Charbonnet's probably the better pass catcher, maybe Walker's the better pure runner, but it's not like, a runaway, I just don't think the difference in ADP should be so extreme. You have a new coaching staff coming in. which kind of means like the previous loyalty probably isn't there. So even if the previous regime was like, all right, we're super in on Kenneth Walker, like we want him to be our guy, there's no guarantee that carries over to this season here in 2024. I just think the Seahawks have two pretty good running backs, and I would just be surprised if Kenneth Walker was like the set it and forget it workhorse running back one, while Charbonnet was just picking up scraps. I think this is going to be a much more competitive committee than people are kind of expecting here. After Kenneth Walker, I'm going with Ramondre Stevenson as my running back 20, and I think Ramondre signing an extension with the Patriots definitely makes me feel a lot better about him this season. Before that extension, there were definitely question marks like, how is this coaching staff actually viewing him? Is he a part of the long-term future? Is this going to be a potential committee this year? And I feel like that extension definitely silences, some of those concerns. The Patriots are committed to him long-term. You're not given like $17 million guaranteed to a running back that you want as like a 50-50 committee member. It would just be a pretty gross misuse of resources. So I think Ramondre is going to be locked in here as the RB1. This Patriots offense probably isn't going to be great in 2024, but you have to expect they're better than last year, getting at least 14 points per game, which they were not able to do in 2023. Ramondre's been a running back one in the past. He was the RB10 in points per game in 2022. He has some receiving upside, and so he is kind of one of the few mid-round running backs that I'm actually interested in targeting, even though, I have some guys ranked ahead of him. Typically, they're going a little bit earlier than I would like, I guess with the exception of like Jonathan Brooks. But Ramondre, if he's there like round 6 territory, I think it makes a lot of sense to hit the draft button on him. And then my final tier 7 running back, it is going to be David Montgomery. He was the running back 15 in points per game last year. I would expect his opportunity share to go down a little bit from last year. Talked about how I expect Jahmyr Gibbs to build on his role, but I still think he's going to be like a weekly fringe running back 2 play, but he also has that built-in like elite upside if Jahmyr Gibbs were to go down. We kind of saw 2 games last year. Gibbs left early week 4, and then he missed week 5. Week 4, Montgomery had 32 carries, 2 targets. Week 5, he had 19 carries, 6 targets. So he's kind of like a handcuff who's also playable on a week-to-week basis, where if Gibbs goes down, he's a locked-in running back 1 week after week, and if Gibbs is healthy, he's like a fringe RB2. So I think this is kind of a fair spot to, pay for that type of guy. Shifting into tier 8, we have Zamir White as my running back 22. And I'm going to be honest, I'm pretty conflicted on Zamir White here. He has so many traits of like the typical dead zone running back that I normally would just, completely be avoiding. He's an unproven player. He's being propped up in drafts by expected volume, right? We're like, oh, the competition's not there. Who else is going to take carries, right? That's been an issue in the past, like Myles Gaskin, Mike Davis, players like that, even like Alexander Madison last year. It's like, well, he's the running back 1, like he's going to get the opportunities. It doesn't work out that way if you're not good enough to, actually capitalize on that. You're not getting great fantasy production. This is also going to be a pretty rough offense here with the Raiders. So there's a lot of things to kind of be concerned about. But for some reason, I'm still kind of interested in him this season. And I think, a part of it is that he's not switching teams. Like, there's kind of a natural pathway for him to take over as the running back 1 here. The Raiders do seem to be pretty high on him. Obviously, coach speak, can't take it at 100%. But it does seem like they want him to be their guy. And what I also like is that even though he had a small sample as like a starting running back last year, he was very productive, and they fed him. So when Josh Jacobs missed time, Zamir White had 4 games where he was the starter. Week 15, he had 17 carries, 4 targets. Week 16, 22 carries, 1 target. Week 17, 20 carries, 6 targets. Week 18, 25 carries, 2 targets. He averaged 15.2 PPR points per game on only 1 touchdown in those 4 weeks. And he averaged 114 scrimmage yards a game. He was efficient last year, 0.33 rushing yards over expected per attempt. That's compared to Josh Jacobs, who was down at negative 0.37. So this running back 1 role is open. Madison is the likely running back 2, who was just bad last year. So even though there are some red flags, I'm still in on Zamir White as like a back-end running back 2. I think he can come in. I think he can have a large workload. I think they want him to be that guy. We'll see. Like I said, it feels a little bit gross, but for some reason I am in on him. And then continuing on with tier 8, we have James Conner as my running back 23. And I'm getting higher and higher on James Conner here. I really liked him for fantasy last year, and it ended up being the right call being in on him, but even I kind of underestimated what Conner could actually do. Like, I was pretty much making the case for him where he was being drafted as a running back 3. I did a video where it was like running back 3s, or guys being drafted as running back 3s who have RB1 upside. He was one of the guys I talked about. I think he finished as like the running back 13 in points per game, so just missed it. But I was drafting him just purely based on him being a volume play. I'm like, all right, the Cardinals didn't bring any competition. They were feeding him the previous season, even though this offense is going to be great. Kyler's going to be missing some time. They're going to be feeding him. The touchdowns may not be great, but the volume's going to be there. He can catch passes, so he can kind of like grind his way to like a gross back-end RB1 season. And he did kind of get that volume, but he also had a big efficiency resurgence, which is something I was not expecting. Typically, running backs start to lose that efficiency. It does not come back. It did come back for James Conner. In 2021 and 2022, he was at negative 0.33 and 0.01 rushing yards over expected per attempt. That jumped all the way up to 1.02 in 2023, which was 4th in the NFL. His yards per carry went from 3.7 and 4.3 all the way up to 5. And he was doing that on an offense that like didn't have Kyler for 9 games, and even with Kyler, like didn't have a ton of great weapons. It was not a top tier unit, and he was playing at a very, very high level. I do think his opportunity share is going to dip a little bit, maybe a lot of it from last year with Trey Benson coming in. He was 9th in the NFL in opportunity share last year, definitely going to be falling out of the top 10. But with how well he played last year, I don't think he's going to be, curling up and, just giving up that starting spot. Like, he played very well. Trey Benson's a rookie. He has the continuity within this offense. And I also just think fantasy-wise, James Conner's been pretty undervalued his entire career. Like, I was looking through his whole career, and even I was kind of surprised when I was looking at it. He has averaged 14 or more PPR points per game in 5 of the last 6 seasons. He's averaged 15-plus points per game in each of the last 3 years. This Cardinals offense should be much better with Kyler, a full season removed for that torn ACL. You have the addition of Marvin Harrison Jr. Trey McBride was breaking out towards the end of last year. So I think this is an offense that could be good enough to support 2 running backs. You have 2 running backs who are both talented. James Conner played very well last year. And even if Trey Benson starts to eat into his workload, I still think he can be giving you, that like back-end RB2 production. And then my final guy here, I guess, for like the RB2s is going to be Raheem Mostert. And I understand the downsides here with Raheem Mostert. I understand the red flags. He's 32 years old. Typically, you're not trying to draft 32-year-old running backs, but he literally was just the running back 4 in points per game, and I am expecting some regression. Like 2023 was a massive career outlier for him. 21 touchdowns is not going to be repeatable, but he still played at a very high level. He was 8th in rushing yards over expected per attempt. I talked about Jalen Wright a little bit earlier on with Devon Achane. Like, I do think Wright's going to push for work in this offense. I think he's a talented rookie, but even last year, right, like I talked about with Devon Achane being the most efficient running back in the NFL, it took multiple injuries to the Dolphins running backs for Achane to even get on the field. Like, they were kind of playing it slow with him. If we didn't have injuries early on to like Jeff Wilson, I think it was like Salvon Ahmed got hurt also. It might have been one of those other like depth options, but there were multiple injuries that allowed Devon Achane to get like, a 1A, 1B committee role. So I don't know if Jalen Wright's going to come in and just take over Raheem Mostert's spot. Like, it seems like they're pretty high on him. I think McDaniels even referenced like that running back room kind of running through him, which not freaking out for Devon Achane. I think they're going to have a pretty solid split here. But I think getting him as like a fringe running back 2 after what he did last year, even if he's falling off, is it going to be so steep that he's going from RB4 to now outside the top 24? Guess we'll see, but I'm fine kind of throwing that dart there. And then continuing on with tier 8, we have DeAndre Swift, and I'm still not quite sure how I feel about this fit. He signs a 3-year, $24 million deal with the Bears, $15 million guaranteed. It's like a solid contract, good pay for a running back, but I guess I'm a little bit kind of concerned here on where the upside is. Like, objectively, DeAndre Swift is not a great pure runner. He's probably not like the ideal goal line back. I don't even think probably. He is not the ideal goal line back. You have guys like Khalil Herbert, Roschon Johnson still on the depth chart, 2 capable running backs. Maybe they trade one of those guys, but as of right now, they are still there. Now, DeAndre Swift's biggest strength is as a pass catcher, and the upside is definitely there for him as a receiving back, but this team is absolutely stacked with weapons. DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen, Cole Kmet. like how much receiving volume is there actually going to be for DeAndre Swift? So I do think you're getting the running back one on a good offense. It makes sense if you're getting him like outside a running back 2 price tag, but I do just have some question marks on what the actual like peak upside there is for DeAndre Swift. Now my running back 26 and 27, also in tier 8, they're in the same backfield. It is going to be Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. Last year, they were actually back-to-back in points per game. Warren was the running back 29. Najee was the running back 30. The issue with these guys is that they're both kind of working against each other because if they're both healthy, their ceilings are pretty capped. Likely like max out as flex options. Probably best case scenario is like low-end RB2s, assuming they're both healthy. But I do think they both should be better here in 2023. Matt Canada was brutal last year. This was the 5th worst team in terms of total points. And I know Arthur Smith, people are very down on him. I have been extremely critical about him, over the past few seasons with his kind of usage of their top picks, Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan Robinson. But we can't forget that he was actually a very, very good offensive coordinator. You look at what he did with the Titans. It's kind of crazy because his criticism with the Falcons was that he failed to get the most out of his elite options, right? Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson. That was literally his strength in Tennessee. Like, he had such a compact offense with A.J. Brown and Derrick Henry just feasting. You didn't have a ton of great other options there. I think Jonnu Smith maybe had a year in there. But, like, he was so focused on getting those top 2 guys the ball. So if he can just focus on being an offensive coordinator, I think he's a much better option. And I think he is definitely better than Matt Canada. He also tends to run pretty run-heavy offenses here. And I think just looking at the personnel, like, that's made sense with his previous stops, right? Didn't have great quarterback play with the Falcons. For the Titans, you obviously had Derrick Henry, so you want to be run-heavy. But you look at the Steelers team, like, you might not think Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren are, like, world beaters, but George Pickens is their wide receiver 1, and then who's their wide receiver 2 after that? Like, there's not a clear guy stepping up. Like, maybe it's Roman Wilson, but do you want a rookie Roman Wilson actually being your wide receiver 2? So I think we're going to get a heavy dose of both Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. I slightly prefer Jaylen Warren just because I think he's honestly the better player. He was actually 3rd in rushing yards over expected per attempt last year. Just way more explosive. Think he should be more involved as a pass catcher. Even though Najee's numbers don't look great last year, he's definitely someone who gets a lot of hate. He was still at 0.31 rushing yards over expected per attempt, which is definitely a big bounce back from 2022. He's going to have the goal line work, the touchdown upside. And then both guys kind of come with that handcuff upside, where if Najee Harris goes down, Jaylen Warren, probably like high-end running back 2, maybe even better. If Jaylen Warren goes down, Najee Harris, same thing. So they're both healthy, both together. They're probably, finding a way to pay off around this price, but they have that upside if an injury were to occur. Behind them, also in tier 8, I think this is my final tier 8 running back, we have Zach Moss. And he's going to the Bengals, kind of switching it up, was with the Colts last year. You have Joe Mixon out, Zach Moss is coming in, and this does feel like a pretty ambiguous backfield at this point. The main competition is going to be Chase Brown, who's a 5th round rookie last year, heading into his 2nd season. Solid size, good athlete, can catch passes, but right now I do think Zach Moss probably should be the favorite to lead this backfield. In his first 3 seasons, he was used kind of more as like a complimentary back, but he took full advantage last year of getting an opportunity when Jonathan Taylor was missing time. So JT, remember, he missed the first 4 games of last year. Zach Moss was injured week 1. Week 2 and 3, he puts up 20-plus PPR points, 100-plus scrimmage yards, and a touchdown in each of those games. Doesn't do anything crazy in week 4, but then the Colts kind of eased JT back into the lineup, and then Moss had another monster game in week 5 where he had 195 scrimmage yards and then 2 touchdowns, 33.5 PPR points. He was also 5th in rushing yards over expected per attempt, so he played very well last year. Wasn't like the clear-cut RB1 for a full season, but in his opportunities, he played very, very well. I think the Bengals are just too good of an offense to not have a fantasy-relevant running back. So I think someone in this backfield is going to end up being a running back 2 or better. And if I had to make a pick on who that would be, Zach Moss would be my selection. Now shifting into the 9th and final tier, my running back 29 was Brian Robinson, and he would be my pick to lead this Commanders backfield. He was the running back 22 in points per game last year. He was at 0.22 rushing yards over expected per attempt. The Commanders lost Gibson. They added Austin Eckler, and this doesn't seem like an overly tough backfield to break down. I think there are some people who, think Eckler still has it. Maybe last year was due to injuries. He's going to end up leaving this backfield. I think at this point in Eckler's career, he should be primarily used as a receiving back. His efficiency was really rough last year. He was at negative 0.27 rushing yards over expected per attempt. He was at 3.5 yards per carry, but he was still productive as a pass catcher. 6th in yards per reception, 8th in target share, 10th in yards per route run. I think B-Rob's going to come in, take the early down work, get the goal line looks, maybe somewhat, limited with Jaden Daniels coming in. Not limited, but, maybe the touchdown upside's a little bit lesser than it would have been with a less mobile quarterback. But I think Brian Robinson still slots in here as like a solid mid-tier RB3. Then my running back 30 and 31, we have running backs from the same team, Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard. I might be one of the few people out there who actually has Spears over Pollard. And I was someone who's very high on Tony Pollard heading into last year. I thought, Zeke gone. He's been so efficient, operating as like, the 1A, 1B, whatever you want to say. Now that he has the backfield to himself, he's just going to go out and absolutely dominate. And then he pretty much face plants. He was very rough last year. I know he was coming off of ankle surgery, but it's also not ideal that like his first season handling a large workload, his efficiency just completely nukes. Like after being one of the most efficient running backs in the NFL, he finally gets that shot and then he just kind of like falls apart. He did sign a 3-year, $21 million deal, $10 million guaranteed. It's a good contract for a running back, but I think this split is going to be pretty close to 50-50 here with Spears and Pollard. As a rookie, like Tajay Spears went in and knocked Derrick Henry down to a 65% opportunity share. In the last 4 seasons, he had not gone below a 78% opportunity share. Tajay Spears came in, was taking work away from Derrick Henry, which, really just does not happen. Sent him to like a mid-tier RB1 and 16th in the NFL in opportunity share. It's not something you see every year with Derrick Henry. He's an explosive player, 5th in breakaway run rate, 6th in yards per touch, also a good pass catcher, 7th in target share, 9th in receptions. I think both are likely weekly running back 3s. Maybe this Titans offense, hits, overachieves, then maybe they're both RB2s. But then they also have that built-in handcuff upside. Spears goes down, Pollard benefits, Pollard goes down, Spears benefits. After those two, I have Devin Singletary up next, and feels gross drafting him here. Devin Singletary kind of feels like the pick that a few years ago would have been going in that running back dead zone. Now we're a little bit smarter, maybe on more casual platforms. He goes earlier on than this, but he really is being propped up just from like this team having no one else. This running back room is terrible. Behind Singletary, you have Eric Gray, Tyrone Tracy, Gary Brightwell. Singletary hasn't been a super flashy option, but like he's put together decent production in 3 straight seasons, 1,000+ scrimmage yards, 30+ receptions. He's actually played 4 full seasons in a row, which for the running back position, very impressive. Solid durability there. And then the Giants went out, they signed Singletary in free agency. They didn't really make a real effort to add, a solid running back too. Shows that they at least have, some sort of confidence in Devin Singletary, or they really just don't care about the running back position. He has history with Brian Daboll from Buffalo. I'm not like, way in on Devin Singletary as the player. This is not an argument that like he's going to be amazing, but the opportunity's there. He's making $6 million this season. His running back 2, 3, and 4 are all 5th round picks or later. There is a very clear path to a strong workload, and he's going at a pretty cheap price. So like back end RB3, I'll pay it. Another guy kind of in a similar situation, not the prettiest backfield, is going to be Gus Edwards. At this point, it looks like he is the favorite to lead this Chargers backfield. His main competition is looking like J.K. Dobbins and Kamani Vidal, and it makes sense at this point for Gus Edwards to lead this group. I think some people are going to like J.K. Dobbins, and I really want to be in on J.K. Dobbins. I honestly feel bad for the dude. I truly believe that without the injuries he's had over the past few seasons, I think we'd be talking about J.K. Dobbins as like a bona fide fantasy running back 1. Like he was a free agent this offseason. If he's healthy, he's probably re-signing with the Ravens. He's probably going higher than where we have Derrick Henry going this season, but unfortunately that has just not been the cards he's been dealt. He tore his ACL in 2021, then he needed a cleanup in 2022, then he tore his Achilles like week 1 of 2023. He has played 9 games in the last 3 seasons, and a torn Achilles can pretty much be like a death sentence for running backs. We saw Cam Akers, even though he had a very quick return, just was not the same dude. And it's not even like the missing games that's concerning to me. Like, I'd take a swing on J.K. Dobbins if you were like, he had all these weird injuries where he just was missing time. It's the fact that these are injuries that change you as a player. Torn ACL, followed up with a torn Achilles, like, he just might be zapped athletically, which honestly really sucks, but that's kind of the world we're living in here. I think Vidal is interesting as like a late round dart, but expecting a 6th rounder to come in, lead a backfield as a rookie is probably an uphill battle. I do think the Chargers are going to want to establish the run. I don't think they're going to be quite as run heavy as some people are expecting, but if he's the running back one, some sort of committee here, I think he'll be fine as like a back end RB3. My running back 34 is going to be Trey Benson. Kind of already mentioned him. Like I said, I was decently high on James Conner, but Trey Benson's definitely still interesting to me. He pretty much seems lined up to be the future running back one here for the Cardinals. James Conner might be that guy this year. Trey Benson should be that guy for the foreseeable future. He has a 3-down skill set. I think he's going to push for a committee here. Even like a 60-40 split, I think could make him like RB3 worthy on this Cardinals offense. James Conner's also been someone who's been a lock to miss time pretty much every single season. It's kind of crazy because he has a very nice floor in terms of his games he's playing. He's played at least 10 games every single season, but he's averaged 3.7 missed games per year. So he's going to miss some time, getting up there in age a little bit. So Trey Benson has some handcuff upside here. Could be a running back one weekly if James Conner were to miss some time. So I still like him here as like a back-end RB3. My running back 35 going to be Javonte Williams. And this Broncos running back room just seems very, very open right now. You have 4 running backs, I think, who have a shot to be in the mix, be involved here. You have Javonte Williams, Samaje Perine, Audric Estime, and then Jaleel McLaughlin. Javonte had a 58% opportunity share last year, which might lead you to believe he should lead this backfield here in 2024, but he was very inefficient. 3.6 yards per carry, 8th worst rushing yards over expected per attempt. It is important to point out that he was coming off a torn ACL, so we definitely could see a bounce back in efficiency here in 2024, and I do think he should have the best odds to lead this backfield, but it's definitely not a guarantee. You factor in the fact that he is not signed beyond the season, like they don't have a ton of loyalty to him. Sean Payton wasn't the dude who brought him in. So I think Javonte, back-end RB3, I feel like at this point is probably fair. Could lead this backfield, but could also kind of fade into a pretty solid committee here. McLaughlin was efficient on, limited opportunities last year. Perine kind of, split touches with Javonte, and then Estime. I think he's kind of interesting. I think Estime could be the guy to come in to take Javonte's work a little bit, but we'll see how it plays out. My final running back here, the running back 36, it is going to be Chase Brown. I already talked about Zach Moss, but I think Chase Brown also has the opportunity to be the lead back here. He has the continuity within this offense, which is something that Zach Moss does not have. We also haven't really seen him get a real crack at an NFL backfield compared to a guy like Zach Moss, who, had some time in Buffalo, was competing with Devin Singletary, not a world beater. He never really stamped his name as I'm going to be the running back one. I am that guy. I guess he kind of did last year, but, limited sample size. So who knows? Maybe Chase Brown could be that dude. I also think kind of worst case scenario, he's a really good handcuff, which here at RB36, you could do worse than, a really nice handcuff here. A guy like Blake Corum is probably going to be going right below this. There were a few other guys that, I thought could have slotted in here. Off the top of my head, Rico Dowdle, Ezekiel Elliott, I think one of those dudes is going to be productive for fantasy this year, so I think they could have slotted in. In terms of my overall rankings, they'd be very close to the running backs here at the bottom. Also, the Browns backfield, Jerome Ford, Nick Chubb, still kind of waiting on some, new injury information on Nick Chubb to kind of see how he's progressing. So those are some of the guys that I think, were just kind of left off the list. Mentioned some of the elite handcuffs, Corum, Charbonnet, guys like that. But that is going to wrap it up for this one. This honestly might be the longest video I've ever posted on here. So let me know if you like these long videos. Hopefully this wasn't, too long, too much. But thank you all for stopping by. If you stayed through the end, 50 plus minutes, thank you. I really appreciate it. I'll have wide receivers, draft strategy videos coming out soon. So stay tuned for that. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.